Good morning, everyone. Today, our group will be discussing the Black social economy based on this week's readings. The Black social economy and the social and the solidarity economy by Shannon D. Wright Austin. Community building and up to using Osusu in the Kanbin Kofu Women's Group in the Gambia by Hedi Niji, and the introduction, a continuous and hidden history of economic defense and collective well-being by Jessica Gordon Nemhard. Together, this reading invites us to relink how economic systems operate when reviewed through the experiences of Black community. In my section, I will focus on Shannon D. Wright Austin's article explaining how she developed her theories, what evidence she used, and how her concept applied to the real-world example of Black corporate economics today. First, Shannon D. Wright Austin's main argument in the Black community around the world have developed her own political and economic system of survival and empowerment to cope with racial exclusion and economic marginalization. Similar to Caroline Schneerson-Hassen's argument, Austin also pointed out that the social economy is not natural. It's a political, racialized, and often created by marginalized group excluded from mainstream market. She argued that for people of African descent, cooperative economic activity is both an act of survival and an act of resistance against racial capitalism. That is, the economic system in which white elites historically profit from the exploitation of black labor in the exclusion of black people from formal credit and poverty uh, system. Specifically, Wright Austin developed this concept through a combination of historical analysis and case studies. First, he traces the long history of cooperative practice among black communities, such as ROSCAS, the Rotating Saving and Credit Association. She used this example to showing that the principle of solidarity, reciprocity, and collective ownership have always existed within Black economic life, long before the modern development institution recognized them. Second, she conducted a comparative case study across the region, including the Caribbean, the United States, and Africa, to illustrate that this alternative economic emergence was wherever structural exclusion exists. For example, she cited the Rastafari community in Jamaica, which developed a cooperative financial system after being excluded from the mainstream bank, and the experience of African American mutual aid and credit union analyzed by Jessica Gordon Nembhard in Collective Courage. Third, Austin engaged with theoretical evidence from the Black political economy. She referenced the Cedric Robinson's concept of racial capitalism, the idea that the modern capitalism was built up on the exploitation of black labor, and that argues that the black social economic challenge is this system by prioritizing community over capital. We can see Warren's idea of the black socio-economic interaction across the many parts of the world today. The first example is the Federation of Southern Cooperative in the United States. It's a network of black farmers in the South who continues to fight against the land loss and discrimination through the resource sharing, cooperative credit union, and sustainable agricultural training. It's referred to Austin's view that the black social economy is both economic and political because its mission is not only to generate income but also to protect black people's land ownership and challenge structural racial racism in American agriculture policy. Secondly, and the Caribbean immigrant woman, SUSU Mutual Aid Group remains its essential financial tools to starting a small business. This informed system continues to fill the gaps left by mainstream financial institutions that overlook or exclude minority entrepreneurs, providing that even in advanced capitalist economy, solidarity-based economics can still have a sustainable
We
development.
in each chapter, community building and Bamboo, invited us to rethink what an economy means when thinking through the everyday lives of Black women. In Gambia, where women are often excluded from banks and formal work, they create their own economic system, Osusu, rotating saving and credit association. Every week, women contribute to a small amount of money, and one member takes the pooled sum. There's no paperwork, no collateral, just trust. For the Kanban Coffee movement, Osusu is more than finance, it's a lifeline. It helps them to pay school fees, open food stalls, or even roof their houses. Nia calls Osusu a shock absorber against failed state policy. It is a form of economic self-defense rooted in community care. Benia pushes us to see something more deeper. These women are not just surviving property, they are producing theories through practice. Their collective money pooling is a black feminist model of resilience, one that resists capitalist exclusion and a foreign debt. Economy can be built on care, reciprocity, dignity, not profit. Nia also connects Gosusu to African philosophy of Ubuntu and Nidadika to explain why it works. Ubuntu means I am because we are. It is an ethics of independence and shared humanity. Nidadika, it is a Gambian concept that refers to sisterhood and mentorship. It is kind of system where every woman is paired with a sister friend who provides guidance and emotional support. To combine these together, these philosophies gives Osusu a moral architecture. Women lead not for profit, but for solidarity. They make decisions collectively, opening and closing meetings with prayer and multi-respect. From this view, Nia reframe economies as relational, not transactional. She draws from Jobson's community economy theory, which challenged the idea that capitalism is the only possible economy. In Osusu, Ubuntu and Idadika turn financial exchange into acts of care, showing that kind of business, empathy, and humanity can coexist. This is what means to dare to conceptualize. It used local idea to produce economy theory rather than borrowing from other Western models. Overall, it's reclaim agency and authorship. Nia's work shows that Gambian women are starting their own economy. Secondly, Osusu demonstrate how economy and democracy merge. The Gambian Conflict Group stay apolitical, maintaining unity beyond party line. Every woman's voice matters in deciding how funds are used. distributive democracy redefines power. It is not as state control, but collective governance rooted in trust. Finally, Nias closed with a humanities statement. Asusu shows that it means to be truly human, making a living with others, through others, bounded with humanness. To dare to conceptualize the black social economy, then is to recognize women's reform cooperative outside of theory making, the practice rooted in Ubuntu and sisterhood. Challenge us to reimagine an economy where care is not weakness but a foundation of freedom.
Hello, today I will be talking about Jessica Gordon Number's piece on collective courage, and I will be specifically talking about the chapter on continuous and hidden history of economic defense and collective well-being. Throughout American history, when African Americans were shut out of the economy, they didn't wait for access, they built their own. Gordon Numbers calls this a continuous and hidden history, a story of resilience where Black communities used cooperation as both economic defense and collective empowerment. Today, I'll break down how these cooperative practices challenged racial capitalism, empowered Black communities, and reshaped ideas of economic justice. Before getting into Numbers' main argument, it is important to understand the context of her work. This reading looks at the long history of Black cooperative ownership, a direct response of centuries of racial exclusion and economic discrimination in the US. When banks, employers, and governments denied African Americans access to resources, they turned to collective ownership as a way to protect their livelihoods. Number described these efforts not as a failure, but more so as an act of resistance and resilience, where cooperation became both a survival strategy and a form of self-determination. These cooperative created spaces of safety, learning, and empowerment. Economic sanctuaries that help Black people support each other in the face of economic injustice. So my thesis for this paper states that Gordon Numbered argues that African Americans developed a continuous and often hidden tradition of cooperative economics using collective ownership, mutual aid, democratic governance as a tool of economic defense and collective liberation against capitalism. When mainstream systems denied them of access to capital, fair wages, and employment, Black communities built alternative economies, cooperatives, credit unions, mutual aid societies that initially and essentially protected their livelihoods and strengthened their autonomy. Lambert frames this history as resistance and not a reaction. Cooperation wasn't just about survival, it was about reclaiming control over production, distribution, and decision making, the core and essence of economic power. In doing so, she challenges the idea that African Americans were only victim of economy, revealing that instead they were innovators and architects of collective systems rooted in justice, democracy, and self-determination within their communities. Now that we understand Namber's thesis, let's look at three main themes that shaped her argument. The first is economic defense. Cooperation acted as a shield against racial capitalism. When racism blocked access to land and employment, Black communities built their own systems: mutual aid societies, farmer alliances, and credit unions to meet their collective needs. These co-ops were not charity. They were long-term strategy for autonomy and resistance, proving that Black communities could indeed sustain themselves outside of exploitative institutions. Second is empowerment and education. Co-ops didn't just create income; they built leadership and civic skills. Members learned to budget, organize, and also had democratic decision making. The Federation of Southern Cooperatives, for example, trained rural farmers to manage land collectively and advocate for policy change. Cooperation became a classroom and a catalyst for dignity. Finally, hidden legacies and collective courages was one of the themes as well. Nembird reminds us that history was erased from mainstream narratives. She calls it collective courage, the bravery to build cooperatives and amid racial terror and exclusion. Leaders like Dubois, Randolph Garvey, and Fannie Lou Hamer saw cooperation as central to liberation. Together, these themes show that cooperation was never marginal. It was a continuous and courageous project of resistance, empowerment, and shared well being. Of course, these cooperative efforts didn't develop under ideal conditions. Nembird highlights how racial segregation, discrimination, and even violence often destroyed Black businesses or made funding impossible to secure. Banks denied credit, segregated markets, blocked sales, and many cooperatives faced threats simply for organizing. Yet, these communities persisted. Their strength was in strategy. Building Black owned credit unions and co ops to recirculate wealth internally and protect themselves through collective ownership. Education also became another form of resistance, where programs like those run by the Federation of Southern Cooperation of Cooperatives trained young people in finances, leadership, and cooperative principles that kept the movement alive. Finally, Nembird stresses that the importance of documentation and advocacy, recording these histories and pushing for supportive policies inspired by global models like the Mondragon in Spain was essential. Lastly, Jessica Gordon Nembird's history doesn't end in the past, it lives today. Movements like the Corporation Jackson in Mississippi, the Freedom Georgia Initiative, and the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network continue to the same legacy of collective ownership and self-determination. These cooperatives reclaim control over land, food, labor, proving that economic justice begins with community power. Numbers remind us that cooperation has never been a side story. It has been the blueprint for survival and liberation all along. So, as we reflect on this history, we might ask, if cooperation has always sustained us, why do we still treat it as an exception rather than the foundation? That question about what kind of economy we choose to build is what makes Numbered's work truly visionary. In conclusion, Across these examples, from the Gambian women's Asusu groups to Black cooperatives in America, the message is the same. Collective care is power. Whether through Ubuntu or economic cooperation, these practices show that Black communities have long created their own models of survival, empowerment, and development. Together, Nambird, J.A., and Wright Austin reminds us that Black social economy isn't theoretical. It's a living tradition of people building freedom through each